Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. Despite Russia trying to convince its domestic audience about the Kremlin's efforts to reach a diplomatic solution to the conflict in Ukraine, the international community seems to have lost any illusions when it comes to Vladimir Putin's intentions. And to talk about it and more, we're joined by Rizzo from the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, first of all, how would you sum up Kirill Dmitriev's visit to the US? A success or not?
I don't think so. I think it was a bit of a PR stunt that ended up backfiring pretty spectacularly. Now, of course, this is the CEO of Russia's direct investment fund. He is a Kremlin economic envoy. He was actually born in Soviet-era Kyiv. And he used this trip to Washington, D.C. last week for talks with officials just shortly after the new Trump administration sanctioned Russian oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil. So he floated these ideas about, quote, diplomatic solutions to the war in Ukraine, talked about symbolic projects like a Putin-Trump tunnel. No one's quite sure what that is. But it didn't really have any substantial impact. In fact, like I said before, I think it really backfired. He went on a morning show with Margaret Brennan, a very well-known journalist here in the United States. And then Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on the show as well and said to her, after she asked questions to him about Dmitriev, he said, "Are you really going to repeat words from a Russian propagandist?" Now, these words came from the Secretary of Treasury under the Trump administration. So I think it just goes to show that there's a real frustration amongst high-level individuals. And this man's visit to Washington did not have the intended effect.
But the frustration of the members of Donald Trump's administration does not always translate into what Donald Trump does himself. Now, where are we exactly in this struggle between the US and Russia over Ukraine? Are we really to wait the next 6 months for any effects of because Donald Trump has given himself 6 months, right, if I'm not mistaken, to see whether Russia is ready to negotiate? Will it really take half a year?
Oh, I think it could take longer than that, actually. You know, during the campaign, remember, Donald Trump said that he would bring an end to this war within 24 hours. That 24 hours came and went pretty quickly. Then he said it would take 100 days. It has been far past 100 days. And so I think that there's an understanding on this administration that Putin has no real desire to negotiate, A, and B, there's also no desire amongst high-level individuals in the Trump administration, including the president himself, to tighten the levers to a point where Putin feels enough pain that he feels like he has no other choice than to come to the table. You know, I hear a lot of the time that Trump consistently flip-flops on his position when it comes to Ukraine. And I actually think that's not true. I think he has been remarkably consistent if you look at it through the lens of him considering a win.
Please say it again. Donald Trump has been extremely consistent when it comes to his approach to Russia and Ukraine.
And yes, and the reason I say that is because he doesn't care if Ukraine wins or if Russia wins. All he cares about is that his team gets a win. So what that means is that he is willing to pull different levers at different time and pressure different sides at different times if it means that he thinks it brings his team closer to saying, look, we brought peace to Ukraine and Russia. So sometimes he pulls weapons back from Ukraine. Sometimes he says they might get more weapons. Sometimes he pressures Russia with sanctions. Sometimes he doesn't. So if you look at it through the lens that he wants a win for his team and he's willing to just pressure either side to get there, then his position is pretty consistent. And it's not what the Biden administration's was. Certainly theirs was, we want Ukraine to win this war. I don't think that's President Trump's position here.
So we are clear about Donald Trump's position. What about Vladimir Putin's position? Because, well, he seems even more straight-minded when it comes to his goals in Ukraine. He always repeats that the root causes of the conflict have not been eliminated. Therefore, nothing changes.
Absolutely. And I think that Vladimir Putin has shown time and time again that this conflict goes to the heart of his rule, goes to the heart of Russian imperialism, Russian revanchism. And so if you look at it through that lens, then of course he has no desire to come to the table and end things. Time is on his side. They have more weapons, they have more people, they have a stronger defense industrial base. And so I think until Vladimir Putin feels enough pressure, maybe that's economic pressure, maybe that's domestic pressure, although we haven't really seen domestic pressure build that much, until we see a mix of more support for Ukraine and tighter economic pain felt by Putin, and an understanding that he is not going to walk away with the type of win that he thought he was going to walk away from. Until we get to that point, he's not going to show any willingness to come to the table. And this administration is just going to get more frustrated and more frustrated that they haven't been able to live up to their campaign promises of bringing peace to Ukraine. I think it's also really important to note that we cannot ask for peace just for peace sake. You listen to Zelensky, and he also talks about a just peace versus a fast peace. And I think we need to stay focused on that.
So what's the idea of just peace? Not for Volodymyr Zelensky, because I think I get it, but for Donald Trump, what would be the just peace in Ukraine? For the both parties to stop now at the front lines, or?
I think that that's what he has in mind. And, a lot of people saw what Trump said last month, I think it was, about him being under the impression that, wow, maybe we are at a point where Ukraine could actually gain all of its territory back. I don't know if Trump actually believed that, or if he said that at the same time that he was floating the idea of sending tomahawks to Ukraine. Like maybe he said those things to really get Putin to blink and to try to push him or force him to the table. But in my mind, I don't think a just peace for this administration looks like a just peace for Ukraine. If we can talk about maybe freezing the line at the current, if we can talk about freezing the war at the current conflict line and using that as maybe a starting point for further negotiations, then I think maybe that's something to talk about. But the idea that Ukraine comes to the table, voluntarily gives up all of this territory, doesn't get any security guarantees in exchange for it, that doesn't make any sense. And that's not something that this administration should be pushing. I don't think it is pushing that, but I don't think that's the right approach. And I certainly hope that's not what anyone is trying to force Ukraine into.
And in this regard, what would be a just peace for Europe? Europe that is currently, leader of support for Ukraine, not the US anymore.
Absolutely. I mean, it has been very clear from day one of this administration here in the United States that Trump and his team, Secretary Hegseth, some of the top advisors at the Defense Department, wanted to push the burden of supporting Ukraine, and they did consider it a burden, towards the Europeans. So they wanted to get the Europeans to shoulder as much of this burden as necessary. They wanted Europeans to send funds, they wanted Europeans to send weapons, and to really take ownership of the outcome of this war. And I think the Europeans have really stepped up to the plate. I mean, there is this sense, I've visited Europe many times this year, talking to Europeans in places like the Baltics, like Poland even, like Germany, that there is this sense of urgency that there is war on their front doorstep, and that it is not just going to take stronger defense industrial bases, it's not just going to take more defensing, it's going to take a whole of society approach if they really want to stop this where it is and avoid this becoming a broader conflict. When it comes to a broader conflict or inadvertent escalation, this has also been a concern about the Europeans when it comes to sending weapons. But I do think that we're at a point where we've been doing this for 4 years. Take some risks, Europe. Be willing to maybe send weapons that you wouldn't have sent before, and let's see if we can create a scenario where there are better terms for Ukraine to come to the table and have a discussion about where this goes from here.
The problem is there's no central European government, despite the fact that we have European Commission. And the Europeans are debating over the use of Russian frozen assets. Belgium is opposing the idea. But the interesting thing here is that Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, claims that he needs this money to keep his country afloat for the next 2 years. Now, what happens if he doesn't get the Russian money? And even if so, if he gets them, what happens after these 2 years?
Well, I think it is anyone's guess. I mean, right now we are looking at a massive economic recovery effort for Western Ukraine. We are looking at major investments into Ukraine's own defense industrial base, looking at things like its own drone industry. The government has opened a Ministry of Defense Technologies to private manufacturers at this point for licensed production. This enables rapid scaling of armaments. So when it comes to the necessities for Ukraine to keep fighting, they need the money to do it. They don't just need the weapons. They don't just need investments. They need their own money and to build local partnerships, this made in Ukraine or build in Ukraine effort, which really incentivizes foreign firms to localize production domestically for things like drones and munitions and systems. So there's a whole of government approach here that I think funding is absolutely key to, and it will be key to Ukraine continuing the fight going forward.
And lastly, shortly, do you think that Donald Trump's no to tomahawks for Ukraine was his final word?
I don't, I stopped a long time ago saying that Trump saying something about a policy is his final word on it, because we all know that he goes back and forth on these specific policy decisions. I think that if there is a scenario where he feels that Putin is being squeezed hard enough and maybe sending tomahawks would get this over the line and really force Putin to the table, then, maybe we could see him give the okay to send them. But I think, again, this is part of a much broader approach. There are multiple levers that have to be pushed and pulled and tweaked at the same time for this to create a kind of like a perfect storm of necessity, I would say, for Putin. So I think if we get to a point where this administration feels like this could be a deciding factor, then we could get there. Unfortunately, I don't think tomahawks are going to be the deciding factor. I certainly think the threat of being sent them made Putin sit back and say, well, wait a minute, now Moscow is in reach if they get those weapons. And that is what created this latest cycle of diplomatic talks, if you can even call them diplomatic talks. But let's see what happens. I don't think it's the final word, but who knows?
Rachel Rizzo from the Europe Centre, the Atlantic Council, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews here on TVP World.